At this point, you are very familiar with the shot list table. You know to input various shot types, shot angles, action in your storyboard, along with the sound effects, dialogue, and the VFX. We're going to look at the duration in this section of creating the storyboard animatic, or as it was previously known, a Leica reel. Pronunciation may be incorrect. The spelling is Leica, Leica reel. The duration will impact the amount of time that any given panel will be displayed in a timeline. Essentially, the animatic will line up all of these images that we've been illustrating so far and play them back for the viewer. The audience could be the director, cinematographer, certainly the animator, or anyone else who is consuming the storyboard in the production. You'll notice that I have highlighted some of these duration inputs. It's because I changed some of these values in the process of making my own animatic. Yes, the animatic is subject to change. Even as early as the pre-production stage, the animatic duration is not a fixed value. It's more of a test. You see what works, if the duration is too brief or if it needs an extra drawing, for example, another key or a breakdown to best inform the action and to tell the animator, to instruct the cinematographer, to instruct the actor how they would perform a given action, then it's obviously going to be subject to those changes. So jumping into Photoshop, I've noted some information here about the animatic creation process, a few key notes. Particularly, you'll see the word aspect ratio pop up very often. To take us back, this was our storyboard. You can see my layers panel here. Let me tear that away. Expand it a bit. In my layers panel, I had dedicated individual layers and even grouped panels and layers of the same. I'd been very fastidious and meticulous about my organization here. If there was a build-up to my illustration from the horizon line, the vanishing point, the guides, that was all input per panel. And when I no longer needed them, I just disabled their visibility. I started to do the line art of the character. I added a few motion lines to indicate the action here. For example, this pen scribbling on the piece of paper. There was a separate group here for all of the props in the scene, fridge, chair, tables, etc. There was also a separate layer for all of the notes that were needed. These were derived directly from the shot list. And I had a separate layer for my lighting. Now, when this is all approved, and the director, which in this case is me, when this storyboard is greenlit, then the next step would be to merge all of these layers into one layer. such as this. As you can see, this is one entire layer. This can be printed out on a PDF format and submitted as a readable document once all of these layers are merged. These are the layers in question. Merging layers is terribly simple. You just shift select the lots. I'm holding down shift while I select, and then I press Control E or Command E for those of you who are working with Macs. So that's simply merging. Additionally, the same action can be found within your layers panel. There's a little menu, a little drop down menu or a toggle menu, floating menu, that will allow quick access to various functions, options particular to layer manipulation. So you can merge the layers there. The organization when you are essentially publishing your storyboard in Photoshop is much simpler. It's just page after page. They're all pretty much derived directly from our previous storyboard. Now, before you actually export this storyboard as a PDF, or even as a Photoshop document, or even as static JPEGs, all of the above are okay, I want us to understand the importance of aspect ratio. The panel images are bound in that box. Remember this box here? Okay, this bounding box is essential as it is a consistent width and height throughout this template. This width and height is in fact 16 by 9. Very important because this will obviously impact the final output as a video format. 16 by 9 is an aspect ratio that is common to various media devices such as televisions, phones, laptops, various gaming devices. It is the now ubiquitous audio-visual file format, audio-visual aspect ratio. There are other aspect ratios that are still in use, but however not as common, such as 1:1, 4:3, I believe, and several others that I will leave links to a very popular Wikipedia page on the same topic. Our objective is to essentially tear away these panels and save them as individual images bound by the 16 by 9 aspect ratio. But before we do that, we need to save this PDF, right? That's a very simple process actually. You would want to enable the visibility of all of the layers. It'll look messy, but trust me, there's a method to the madness. You navigate to your file, go to export, layers to files. You would browse until you find the given destination, and you would add a file name prefix. So you can have whatever prefix you need to submit your storyboard. Mine would just be something simple, perhaps after the trade page. And they would appear as after the trade page 1, after the trade page 2, after the trade page 3. Make sure that you deselect visible layers only, just in case there's any other layer you would want to add on. And the file type should be PDF. Again, you're free to export as PSD. I'll even accept JPEG, even PNGs. Those are acceptable file types. Then you can proceed to run this process. It shouldn't take too long, but just be aware of any programs that are running in the background that might slow down the process. Eventually, what you end up with, I'm just going to cancel that because I already have mine here. You end up with around, in my case, 18 separate pages, including some of those layers that were invisible. Those ones are exported as well. Now, compiling these is contingent upon your Acrobat Reader or PDF Reader license. So if you have a fully licensed Acrobat Reader, you should be able to organize your pages, and you should be able to insert pages in a particular sequence, or extract, or replace, or even move them around. You can be able to do this very easily if you have, a licensed Acrobat Reader or a PDF editor with these certain capabilities. And there you have it, a PDF all put together. All of these pages lined up. Now when it comes to the animatic, you do not need this information here. This was good for the storyboard. As a static medium, it's readable. Several people who would have access to this in the production can read through it, and it's a sufficient guide. But we want to advance and create our Leica reel to put this static medium into motion. Let's jump back into Photoshop. Clear up some of this mess and understand that we can create a different PSD document to funnel all of these individual panels into, as long as we are very careful to keep in mind the aspect ratio. So what I like to do, because I'm very meticulous about my aspect ratio, is create a different PSD document with a certain aspect ratio, either 1280 by 720p or 1920 by 1080p, and it is in this document that I would then duplicate all of these individual images and align them to fit. What are the dangers of avoiding these steps? What would go terribly wrong if you don't keep in mind the aspect ratio? You do not maintain your field size. That's one risk. The other risk is you do not maintain the device type that's capturing these images. Varied devices capture the image in different aspect ratios. A common example is how smartphones capture 720p in portrait, while DSLR cameras capture the same 720p in landscape. You need to maintain the aspect ratio, otherwise it appears at the very least that you are utilizing different devices or switching devices to capture your animatic. The process of duplicating an image here is actually quite easy. You have a select image, or sorry, a select layer. what I must do is proceed in this manner. Oh, sorry, not new layer, new doc. I want the certain aspect ratio of 1280 by 720. Making sure that the orientation is in landscape, not portrait, landscape. A brand new fresh doc. I would use my marquee selection tool to select a particular panel, and I could cut this away. This is what I'm going to duplicate onto the new 1280 by 720 doc. There we go. Then I just go about the process of aligning it, resizing it to fit. You might be wondering why all of this caution. Ultimately, what I gain from all of these cautions and precautions and steps is images with consistent, images with consistent width and height dimensions. Each and every one of the images that I now extract from that 1280 by 720 PSD have set width and height. It will then appear as if all of these images that were derived from my storyboard and going to go into my animatic all are captured with the same camera, same device. The consistency is crucial. Every single one of my animatic images, remember that there were 2 a page and there were 18 pages, all have the consistent dimensions. Very important. This is then, because we're not done yet, this is then funneled into a video editing software such as, however, not limited to, Premiere Pro. Some of you might be more familiar with other video editing software, Final Cut. I think there's another one called Nuke. There are several. However, I will be utilizing Premiere Pro while appreciating that this functionality is not limited to Premiere Pro. It's not only Premiere Pro that can create animatics. The same way it's not only Photoshop that can create storyboards. In Premiere Pro, for those of you who will follow my footsteps and use this software, there are a few considerations I made when creating my project. First, let me start off by creating a new project actually. I changed my display format from the default timecode. I switched that to frames because as an animator, chances are higher that my production program or production software will display a timeline in frames. Not feet and frames, not in an SMPTE timecode, but frames. This is the case in 2D animation such as 2D animation software such as Animate, TV Paint, Procreate, Toon Boom, and it's the case in 3D animation software Max, Maya, Blender, the list goes on. So when I'm creating my animatic, I'm thinking about my target software, and it will be in frames. So I'm creating frames projects. Another consideration is my sequence settings. Let me actually select my sequence and jump into the sequence settings. You'll see that the display format is also in frames. Okay. And the time base is not the default 29.97. I switched it to 23.976 because 24 FPS is the native or the default or the more commonly used frame rate for animations. And here's my width and height, 1280, 720. It is in this sequence that I imported all of my 36 images individually. Very important to note that I imported them individually, not as a sequence. Let me show you how that worked. Import. You select the first one, but you make sure that image sequence is disabled. Disable it. For the purposes of creating an animatic, disable the image sequence because you want to have full control when adjusting the duration of each and every one of these images. Let me mute this because it might be a problem. The ability to adjust the duration of each one of these individual images of a fixed aspect ratio in your project, in your sequence, is the power of editing your animatic. Let's take an example of this initial drawing, or this early drawing of Jack hugging his mother from behind, bounding across the table. Actually, let's see here. Jack, late teens, gangly, bounds across the table and hugs Pamela from behind. This is the image that we're seeing here. So we can reduce this particular image and increase the duration of the next image, which is the hug. Okay? And that particular adjustment will impact the position of the keys in the production, the animators' work when they're creating the keys and breakdowns. It has a direct impact on the production. Now, another thing I wanted to include, particular to the animatic creation, is something called a time code. It's this numerical value that you're seeing floating here. And I'm going to take you through how to create the time code in Premiere Pro. However, note that not all editing software will include this effect. So I'm just going to hide it real quick. Premiere Pro, especially version 2020 and beyond, excluded the use of legacy titles. So if you want to add a blank title, the easiest way to go about it is to simply grab your type tool, click on your stage, go back to your selection tool to leave it empty. Now you just have this null value here. It has nothing in it. You can then add an effect to that null. I'm going to search for timecode, grab it, and drop it in my effect controls for that graphic. Pretty simple. Pretty simple. Now the only thing left to do is to extend the visibility of this graphic so that it spans the entirety of my animatic. And there we have it. Almost. First, we want to change a few things about this particular time code. We want to change in order the position. I prefer my timecode position to be at the top rather than the bottom. So I'm going to change its Y value, place it a bit higher up. The size is fine with me for readability, legibility. Opacity is fine with me. I can get rid of the field symbol, and then I need to change it from SMPTE, which is a format you're seeing here, to frames. Because again, as animators, I already explained, we are more likely to work in production softwares that deal in frames. The timecode source is not going to be the media, but the clip. Alright, very good. Because here we are at frame 0, and our timecode should match. And there we have it. It's really simple. You want to make sure your timecode is not obscuring the images in your animatic. If there is a case where there is an action happening, say on example in this image, Jack's forehead, let's say there's something interesting happening there, the timecode is getting in the way, you can always shift it in the x-axis, tuck it away in a corner. As long as it's legible, visible, and it's a readable reference, you'll be okay. The labor of synchronizing audio with the visuals, I cannot go into too much detail about it. I will tell you that when you are adding audio to your Premiere Pro project, you want to make sure that this particular audio file is not locked. You don't want to toggle the track lock, as this may impact the final render. Muting the track is only a temporary option. It will still render out with audio whether it's muted or not. For further information regarding audio editing, very basic audio editing, I will leave supporting video tutorials. The last thing you want to do with your animatic is export it. Simply press Ctrl M to export. And here we have an export settings window. I want to discuss particularly the format. You need to have one of these smaller compressed formats, not AVI. AVI, which is often the default, ends up being quite large. There is a value somewhere often indicated towards either the summary or at the very base here. There's normally an estimated file size. When it comes to AVI, it's exceedingly large. AVI file types are notoriously large. Make sure you do not export AVI. You need either the H.264 codec, which gives us a smaller estimated file size, which is 110 MB. We can make this smaller, I'll show you how. Or you can go with a QuickTime MOV. QuickTime is also much smaller in comparison to AVI. You want to make sure that the summary is correct as per the destination folder, the frame rate, the rendering, it's progressive, that's 720p, that's okay. You want to make sure that export audio and video are enabled. I'm going to go back to my H264 and show you one of the considerations that I make when I'm exporting my video. And here we have it, the bitrate settings, very important. There is a value for target bitrate and maximum bitrate. I want to reduce these significantly, even by half, especially for something as medium quality as an animatic. It should not be this high. I want my target bitrate to be around 4, and note what happens with the estimated file size. I want my maximum bitrate to be 5. That looks good to me. And I can check the preview, see that my quality is still good. Everything's going as per, it's going well. So I'm not losing out on quality, but I am gaining on a smaller file size, which is easily shared. At the end of the day, I end up with an animatic which could even be as small as 27 MB. That's something you can even share on WhatsApp. Very, very small, very user-friendly.